My dad always told me I'd never make it without him. Last week, I buried him, and I still don't know if I proved him wrong. I come from a family where success is measured in square footage and how early you can retire. My dad was one of those built-from-nothing types, the guy who worked 2 jobs through college, started a construction company in his 20s, and, by 40, had a house with a 3-car garage, a boat, and a wife who never had to work again. He didn't believe in therapy. He believed in 5 a.m. wake-ups, firm handshakes, and the kind of masculinity you don't question, because that's just how things are. When I was 13, I told him I wanted to be a writer. He laughed. Not in a mean way. Just the kind of laugh that lets you know you've said something childish. You mean, like, the newspapers? He asked. No, I said, like novels, stories. He looked at me like I told him I wanted to open a bakery on the moon. He patted me on the back and said, well, we'll see what the real world has to say about that. We never really recovered from that moment. It wasn't just that he didn't understand me, it's that he didn't want to. Every time I brought up books, or poetry, or films that moved me, he'd nod politely and steer the conversation back to something useful. He wasn't cruel. He paid for school. He showed up to my graduation. He gave me a handshake and an envelope with a check inside. But the look on his face, it said everything. This isn't the son I imagined. After college, I struggled. I took freelance gigs, worked at a coffee shop, tried to pitch screenplays and essays, and got rejected more times than I can count. He'd call every few weeks and ask, "You got a real job yet?" And when I said no, he'd go quiet for a second, then change the subject. Eventually, I stopped answering. The last time we really spoke, was 5 years ago. I told him I wasn't coming home for Christmas. I couldn't take the looks, the side comments, the forced smiles. I said I'd rather be alone than be made to feel small in my own family. He said, "Suit yourself." That was it. Then, last month, my sister called. Dad collapsed in the garage. Heart attack. He didn't make it. Just like that. No goodbye, no final word, just silence. And suddenly, I found myself back in the house I grew up in, shaking hands with men in suits who all said the same things. Your dad was proud of you. He talked about you all the time. And I wanted to scream. Because if he was so proud, why did he spend his life making me feel like a disappointment? After the funeral, I stayed in the house for a few days. Not because I wanted to, but because someone needed to help my mum sort through the mountain of paperwork, the life insurance calls, the endless casseroles people kept dropping off like warm reminders that grief comes with side dishes. The house felt like a museum of who my father was. Framed golf scorecards in the hallway, a massive flat screen in the den tuned to financial news even though no one was watching awards from the Chamber of Commerce. His name engraved on crystal plaques that meant nothing to me. His office was the same as I remembered, neat, intimidating, impersonal. But there was one drawer I'd never seen open before. Bottom right. My mum said, that's where he kept personal stuff. I never touched it. I don't know why I opened it. Curiosity, spite, some stupid hope for a hidden letter that would say everything he couldn't say out loud. Inside were folders. Manila labelled in his clean, blocky handwriting. One caught my eye immediately. Sam. Career. My name. I pulled it out and opened it. What I found was confusing. Printouts of my articles, even the little ones. A short story I got published in a tiny online journal in 2017. He'd printed that out too, with a yellow sticky note that read, "Surprisingly good." There were emails I'd sent him years ago, about a podcast I was producing, a pitch that got picked up, all printed, highlighted, underlined. At the bottom of the stack was a photo of me at 10 years old, reading under a blanket with a flashlight on the back. He'd written, "Always lost in a story." I stared at that photo for a long time, because here's the thing, he never talked about my writing. Not once did he say he'd read something I'd published. Not once did he say he listened to an episode of my show. He never asked questions, never gave feedback, never even acknowledged that I'd built something on my own. But here it was, a quiet record, a hidden archive, pride buried under silence. Why? Why couldn't he just say it? Why was it so hard for him to tell me what he apparently told everyone else? That night, I sat in the kitchen alone and drank too much. I thought about every conversation we could have had. Every time I almost picked up the phone, every time I backed out of saying, "I need you to meet me halfway." And I realized something I hadn't admitted before. I didn't just want him to be proud, I wanted him to show it. To tell me he was wrong. To say he didn't understand but was willing to try. Instead, I got a folder in a locked drawer. And for the first time, I wasn't angry. I was heartbroken. Because I think he did love me. But he didn't know how to do love in the way I need it. And I never gave him the roadmap. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with a headache and a phone full of unread messages. Condolences, logistics, one from a cousin asking if we were still doing the big family 4th of July. This year, I deleted it without answering. My mum was already up, sitting at the kitchen table staring at a half-eaten piece of toast. She looked exhausted in a way I hadn't seen before. Not just tired, hollowed out. She nodded toward the coffee pot. Fresh. We sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "You found the drawer, didn't you?" I nodded. "I always thought he was too hard on you," she said, "but I also know he thought you were braver than him." That caught me off guard. "Braver?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "He didn't understand your choices, but he respected them more than he ever admitted." I thought about that for a long time because it didn't match the man I grew up with. The man who measured worth by income and stability. Who once told me, when I was between jobs, there's no shame in doing something you hate if it puts food on the table. But maybe I misunderstood him too. Maybe we both got locked into roles. Him, the disapproving father, me, the misunderstood son, and neither of us knew how to get out. That day, I went for a long walk through the neighborhood, past houses I hadn't thought about in years, past the school where I'd sat through lectures while scribbling story ideas in the margins of my notebook, past the library where I used to pretend I was researching homework, but was really just reading Vonnegut and Baldwin and Didion, hoping they'd show me the way out. And I realized something else. I never told my dad what my success meant to me. He saw the struggle, the financial uncertainty, the side gigs and rejections, but he never saw the emails from strangers saying my work helped them through hard times. He never saw the way my wife looked at me when I hit publish on something I was proud of. He never saw me, not because he didn't try, but because I didn't let him. I was so busy defending my path that I never invited him onto it, and maybe, just maybe, he was waiting for that invitation. That night, I went back to his office. I took out the folder again. This time I read every line carefully, every comment, every underline, and at the very bottom, on a post-it, stuck to a printed blog post I barely remembered writing, were 5 words in his handwriting. "He's better than I was." I sat down on the floor and cried not angry tears, not even sad ones, just tired, grateful, aching tears, because I spent so much of my life trying to prove him wrong. But maybe, quietly, he'd already decided I was right. After that night, something shifted. Not in the house. It was still filled with the same quiet grief, the same polite casseroles, the same never-ending to-do list that follows death like a shadow. But inside me, something let go. I stopped looking for the perfect explanation, the perfect apology, the missing moment that would somehow stitch the story back together. Instead, I started paying attention to the story we did have, the little ways my dad tried, like the way he used to fill up my gas tank without saying anything whenever I came home from college, or how he'd leave a paper on the kitchen counter with a circled article about someone who made it as a writer, even if he never brought it up directly, or the fact that, when I moved out for good, he packed my things with military precision, labeling every box, wrapping every mug, while saying, "This is how you move like a man." That was his love language. Competence, provision, quiet, effort. And I missed it for years because I was waiting for love to look like the movies. I started talking to my mum more. Not just about the funeral or the estate, but about him, about how they met, about the early days before the business took off, about the time she told him she was pregnant with me and he panicked so hard he accidentally backed his truck into a ditch. We laughed. She said, "He never stopped being afraid he'd mess you up." I said, "He did, but not the way he thought." And she nodded, not defensive, just understanding. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table and started writing. Not an article, not a eulogy, just a letter. To him, I told him everything I wish I'd said sooner. I told him I saw the effort now, the folder, the post-its, the small gestures. I told him I still hurt, that I still wished he'd said it out loud, but that I was learning to accept the way he showed love too. I told him I was proud of him, that he built something from nothing, that he tried, even if it didn't always land the way he hoped, that I see him now, not just as a father, but as a man. When I finished, I didn't know what to do with the letter, so I folded it, walked into his office, and placed it in the same drawer where I found the folder. A full circle. 2 people trying in different languages to say the same thing. I see you, I'm trying. I love you. That night, I slept in my old bed, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream of fighting with him. I dreamed we were building something together. A few weeks after the funeral, I went back home. Not to visit his grave. Not for any symbolic reason, just life. My wife, my job, my apartment. My world had kept turning, even while part of me was stuck back in that house, staring at folders and ghosts. But something was different. I didn't come back bitter. I came back curious. I found myself digging through old emails between us, looking not for what he said, but for what he meant. There was one from 2014. I had just started working with a small production company and was feeling out of my depth. I'd emailed my dad out of frustration, more rant than request, complaining about the chaos, the instability, the feeling that I was failing. His reply was one sentence. "If you're uncomfortable, it means you're growing." I remember scoffing at it. Then thought it was his usual tough love nonsense. Now I see it for what it was, the closest thing he could offer to encouragement. He didn't know how to fix the feelings, but he wanted me to keep going. I started noticing these moments everywhere. Old voicemails where he told me, "Call if you need anything," which I always dismissed as empty, but now I think he really meant it. He just didn't know what I needed. Birthday cards with stiff, formal messages. "Proud of you. Keep it up." That used to feel cold, but now feel like the best he could manage through whatever emotional steel he'd inherited. And I realized something else. He didn't grow up with this language of openness. He didn't have a dad who hugged him or asked how he felt. He had a father who worked, drank, came home late and expected obedience. My dad evolved. Maybe not enough. Maybe not the way I needed. But he still broke the cycle, even if only a little. And that little, it mattered, because I felt it. In the folder, in the notes, in the way he let me go chase something he didn't believe in, but never tried to stop me. It made me think about what kind of father I'll be. I don't have kids yet, but I want to. And I want to be the kind of dad who says it out loud, who doesn't just hope his kids know he loves them, but tells them 1,000 different ways, even when it's hard. But I also want to give myself grace, because now I see how easy it is to fall into silence, how easy it is to let pride dress itself up as protection, how tempting it is to hold back because you think vulnerability looks like weakness. He wasn't weak. He was afraid. And so was I. We were 2 scared men on opposite sides of a canyon, both waiting for the other to build a bridge. And even though we never met in the middle, I think, in the end, we both started walking. A month ago, I visited his grave for the first time since the funeral. It wasn't planned. I was in town for work, had a couple of hours to kill, and found myself driving familiar roads without really meaning to. The cemetery was quiet. Just a couple of groundskeepers in the distance. Spring had started to wake the grass back up. There were fresh flowers on a few headstones I stood in front of his for a long time. His name, his birth year, the dash, the year he died. All that life, squeezed between 2 dates and a straight line. It's a cruel economy of space, how little we leave behind in stone. I sat down on the grass, no speech prepared, no poetic monologue, just silence. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I thanked him. For trying, even when he didn't know how. For showing up, even if it wasn't the way I hoped. For teaching me that effort isn't always loud, and love isn't always fluent. I told him about the letter, about how I finally understood what he'd been trying to say. All those years, in the only language he knew, I told him I forgave him. And I asked him to forgive me too, for expecting him to be someone he couldn't be, for never saying, "I see you." Before I left, I placed something at the base of the headstone. Not flowers, not a photo, the printed copy of the short story he'd marked surprisingly good. The first thing I ever published, the beginning of my world, in a way, and maybe the first moment he realized I wasn't going to be him. And that was okay. As I walked back to the car, I felt lighter. Not fixed, not finished. Just clear. This isn't a story about perfect resolution. It's not a tidy arc with hugs and redemption. It's a story about two people doing the best they could with what they were given, and how sometimes that has to be enough. Because here's what I've learned. You don't have to wait for a eulogy to speak kindly. You don't have to wait for someone to change before you let go of what they couldn't be. You don't have to carry the silence forever. I didn't get the father I dreamed of, but I got the one who raised me the best way he knew how. And now I carry him differently. Not as a shadow, but as part of the map that got me here.